At dinner at my house, my niece teased my 6-year-old son about his stutter. My mom said, "We all laughed, don't be so serious." I didn't reply. But my husband did. Without thinking twice, he just kicked them out. And 2 days later, when they found out that I had cut them off from the mortgage payments, they went crazy. It was my birthday and I'd spent the whole morning prepping the house. Not because I wanted a big celebration, but because my mom had insisted we do something proper this year. We hadn't hosted anyone in a while, especially not after what happened to my son 10 days ago. I hadn't told most of the family the details. I just said he was going through something and we were taking it slow. I didn't feel like explaining what it's like to watch your 6-year-old change overnight. 10 days ago we were walking back from school just like always. We waited for the walk signal, looked both ways, all of it. Then this car flew through the red light. Guy had to be doing 60 in a residential zone. Missed us by maybe 2 feet. I remember the sound more than anything. That engine, the screech of tires, the wind rushing past. And the look on my son's face. The guy never stopped. Never got caught. Just vanished down the street like none of it mattered. My son didn't speak the rest of that day. The next morning he tried to tell me he didn't want to go to school and it came out slow and broken. He stuttered. Badly. Like his brain knew what to say but his mouth forgot how. We've seen specialists already and they said it's trauma-induced. It'll take time. No promises. I wasn't ready to tell the whole family about it, mostly because I didn't trust them to handle it well. That sounds harsh, but they've never been the kind of people who pause before making a joke. Especially my brother's daughter, 10 years old and already acting like she runs a roast show on cable. So we had them all over. My mom and dad, my brother and his wife and their daughter, and a cousin who brought some dry cookies that tasted like packing peanuts. I made sure to keep things low-key. Grilled some food, put out drinks. We stayed out on the patio where the kids could play. My son stuck close to me. I could tell he was nervous. Every time someone asked him something, he'd glance at me like he needed permission to try speaking. It broke me a little every time. Then it happened. During dinner, my niece asked him what his favorite animal was. He tried to answer. I think he was trying to say dinosaur. But the word wouldn't come out. He got stuck on the first syllable. She laughed. Loud. She repeated the way he said it, exaggerating it like she was doing a skit. My son immediately looked down at his plate. Didn't say another word. And then my mom, sitting there with a glass of wine in her hand, smiled and said, "We all laughed. Don't be so serious." I don't even know if she noticed what she said. I don't think she cared. No one said anything to the niece. My brother looked down at his phone like it had nothing to do with him. His wife reached for more salad. It was like watching a movie scene where no one's aware of how horrible they sound. I didn't even speak. I just stared at them, wondering if this was really my family. But my husband didn't stay silent. He stood up. Not in a dramatic way. Just stood like he'd made a decision. He walked around the table, gathered the useless little gifts they brought. A mug with a glittery cat, a lotion that smelled like synthetic lavender, and a card that didn't even have a handwritten note, and put them in front of them. He told them we were done. That dinner was over. That they could leave. At first they thought he was joking. My niece even laughed again. But then he repeated it. Louder this time. And something about the way he said it made even my dad go quiet. They got up. Grumbling. Confused. My mom asked if we were really doing this on my birthday. My brother said nothing, just gave me a look like I'd embarrassed him. I didn't flinch. I just sat there with my hand on my son's back. He was still staring at his plate, not moving. After they left, we cleaned up in silence. The backyard felt heavier than it had earlier, like the air itself was weighed down. We didn't talk much that night. Just watched TV and let our son fall asleep next to us on the couch. But the next morning after breakfast, my husband asked me something. I'd been thinking the same thing. Why are we still paying their mortgage? It started with a text from my brother the next morning. No apology. No mention of what happened. Just a casual hope we can talk soon, like the night before had been some awkward joke that didn't land. I stared at the message longer than I should have, then put my phone face down on the counter. My husband saw it and didn't ask. He already knew. For years we'd been quietly covering my brother's mortgage. It began when he lost his job, back when he swore it would only be for a couple of months. He said he just needed breathing room. We had it barely, so we helped. At first I told myself this is what family does. You step in. You don't keep score. But time passed. He found another job. Then another one after that. The mortgage payments never became his problem again. Somehow they stayed ours. Meanwhile they upgraded cars, went on beach trips and talked about remodeling their kitchen. Every time my husband noticed, he'd look at me and I'd say it's temporary. Eventually that word stopped meaning anything. The morning after the dinner, my husband finally said what we'd both been thinking. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked why we were still paying for people who laughed at our kid. I didn't have an answer. That silence was enough. Before lunch we called the bank. No drama. No big speech. We removed our payment info and canceled the automatic transfers. When the woman on the phone confirmed it was done, I felt something loosen in my chest. Relief mixed with dread. I knew the reaction wouldn't be quiet. We didn't warn them. We didn't explain. I didn't feel like writing some careful message that would just get twisted into something else. If they wanted answers, they could start by apologizing. 2 days later my phone blew up. Missed calls from my brother, one after another. Voicemails stacked up without me listening to them. My mom called too, then texted, then called again. I read one message from her that said we were embarrassing the family and being dramatic. Nothing about my son. Nothing about the stutter. Just concern about how this looked. That night my brother finally left a voicemail I did listen to. He asked how I could do this to him, how he was supposed to make the payment now, how family doesn't turn their backs like this. He sounded panicked. Not sorry. Not reflective. Just scared about his own situation. The next afternoon, while my husband was at work and my son was upstairs watching cartoons, I heard loud knocking at the front door. Not a normal knock. Angry. Persistent. I didn't even have to check the camera. It was my brother. He was already yelling before I opened the door, asking what I thought I was doing, asking if I'd lost my mind. He demanded to know how he was supposed to pay the mortgage now and said I was punishing his whole family over nothing. Then he said something that made my hands go cold. You're ruining everything over a little stutter. I opened the door. Because I didn't want him waking up my son. He was yelling loud enough for the whole street to hear. At that point I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted it to stop. He was already mid-rant when I opened it. No pause, no hello. Just accusations pouring out of him like I'd committed a crime. Said he came over because I hadn't answered any of his calls. Said I was acting like a spoiled brat. Said I was blowing things way out of proportion over a joke. And the worst part? He kept smirking like he thought if he stood there long enough, I'd come to my senses and apologize to him. I didn't say anything. I just let him go on. He said I was being dramatic. That his daughter was just playing around, and my son probably didn't even remember it. That I was being too sensitive like always. He said that if anything, this whole situation was showing my son how weak I was, how weak we were, for letting something so small spiral into this whole mess. He said my husband was trying to isolate me from the family and that he had always been too controlling. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. He said, "You've let some dumb kid thing turn into a war. You're letting a little stutter ruin people's lives. He's not even sick, Lisa. He just talks weird." That's when I slapped him. It wasn't a build-up. I didn't wind up or yell. My hand just moved and connected with the side of his face. He blinked fast like he wasn't sure if it really happened. And then he looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Like I was the problem. Like the years of help, the money, the listening, the patience, all of it meant nothing because I finally said no. And then came the words I didn't expect to sting the way they did. "You're a stupid sister. Not cruel. Not clever. Just stupid." Like I'd fallen for something fake. Like I wasn't smart enough to see that my son's trauma wasn't real. He said I was making everything worse. That I'd turned into a cold, bitter woman who cut people off over jokes. That I should be ashamed. That family helps each other. That's what family does. And that I'd made myself into the kind of person no one wants around. He accused me of being under my husband's thumb, of letting him control me, of letting him decide who my family was. He actually had the nerve to say, "I always knew you'd forget about us once you had a house and a kid and a husband with a job." I didn't say a single word back. Not one. I stepped inside and shut the door. He didn't knock again. He didn't yell. He just stood there for a second, then walked away. I watched through the side window. He didn't look back. I stayed at the door for a while. I could hear my son upstairs, still humming along to whatever show he was watching. He hadn't heard it, thank God. I remember my hands still tingled a little. Not from the slap, but from the fact that I'd actually reached a point where I couldn't keep swallowing everything anymore. I sat in the kitchen until my husband came home. Told him what happened. He didn't ask many questions. Just stood there with that quiet look he gets when he's past anger and somewhere deeper. He asked one thing. "Did you lock the door?" I nodded. And then I told him the part that really bothered me. That none of them even asked how our son was doing. Not once. Not a single text from my mom or my dad or anyone. It had been days and no one cared what that night had done to him. No one asked how he was sleeping. No one asked if he'd spoken. All they cared about was their mortgage, their image, their embarrassment. That night we agreed, no more contact. No more calls. No more guilt. No more pretending like they were owed our help just because we shared blood. But the universe didn't want to make it that easy. Because 2 days later my mom showed up on our doorstep. And she didn't come alone. It was around noon when I heard the knock. Not loud, not aggressive. Just steady. I peeked out the front window and there they were. My mom standing straight like she was about to give a presentation. My dad a step behind her, hands in his coat pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I thought about pretending I wasn't home. But my husband was upstairs working and my son was in the den watching TV. I didn't want them waking him up or creating a scene, so I opened the door halfway and stepped outside. She didn't waste time. Said she just wanted to talk to clear up this whole situation. That everyone was still raw and upset, and if we all just sat down and spoke like adults we could move past this. She made it sound like it was a disagreement over a recipe or an accidental comment, not a complete betrayal of my child's trust in his own family. I asked her directly, do you even understand why we're upset? She said, of course. But kids are stronger than you think, Lisa. He'll be fine. Like it was all a minor inconvenience. Like my son hadn't gone almost silent since the near accident, hadn't started stuttering, hadn't just been laughed at by his own cousin while everyone sat around and did nothing. Then she dropped it. The real reason they came. She said my brother had no idea we were going to pull out of the mortgage support. That he's not ready to take that on, not after the holidays. That we could have given him a warning. And that just one more month, just January, would give him enough time to figure things out. It wasn't even framed as a request. It was phrased like something any decent sibling would obviously do. I asked her if she'd spoken to him about what his daughter did. She hesitated. Said something like, kids say things, you can't police everything. That was enough for me. But then my dad spoke. For the first time. He said we were making a scene over nothing. That stuttering isn't the end of the world, and if we hadn't been so quick to panic after the street incident, maybe our son wouldn't have made such a big deal out of it either. He actually said, you've got to stop babying him. Kids bounce back, but only if their parents let them. My husband heard that from the stairs. He came down and stood next to me. Quiet. He looked at both of them and said he didn't want to hear another word. That he had let this go on long enough. And then, without raising his voice, without blinking, he told them that if they ever showed up again, if they ever tried to guilt me or get around him, he'd file a report with the police. He said that every payment we'd made on their behalf, over 2 years' worth, was documented. He said he'd already spoken to someone about whether it could be considered financial coercion. And that if they didn't want things to go that route, they needed to back off permanently. My dad went pale. Not visibly afraid but unsettled. My mom laughed like she couldn't believe he'd said it, but I saw the way she clutched her bag. They left without another word. We closed the door and locked it. For the first time that didn't feel dramatic. It felt right. That night my brother sent one last message. A long one. Full of half-hearted justifications, digs at my husband, and a warning that I was destroying the family over a kid who probably won't even remember this in a year. Said I was siding with the wrong people. Said I'd regret this. My husband read it, handed me the phone, and I deleted it myself. We sat on the couch later that evening, quiet. Our son had a good day. He'd laughed a lot. Tried to tell a long story about a robot cat he'd made up, and yes, he stuttered through it, but he didn't stop. That was progress. He didn't look scared anymore. And while I sat there, it hit me. The most painful part of all this wasn't losing the connection with my family. It wasn't the drama, the yelling, or the money. It was the silence. Not one of them had asked how my son was doing. Not one of them even cared. The silence didn't last. After the door closed on my parents, after my husband warned them flat out, things went quiet for a few days. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that builds pressure. Like the air before a thunderstorm. My husband said they were regrouping and I knew he was right. My family doesn't let things go. They just wait, then come at it sideways. The first attempt came through Megan, my cousin. She hadn't spoken to me in over a year, and suddenly I get this sugary message on Instagram. She opened with, "Hey love, just checking in, hope you're okay." Then immediately shifted into, "The family's really upset. They feel like you're cutting everyone off over a misunderstanding." She hadn't been at the dinner. She had no clue what happened, but that didn't stop her from giving her 2 cents. She said things like, "You're all adults, can't you just talk it out?" And, "I know your son is going through a tough time, but don't let that ruin family." Ruin family. I didn't reply. I just blocked her. Then my aunt emailed me. An actual email. Formal and passive-aggressive, like she was writing to an HR department. She said my parents were distraught. That they couldn't sleep. That my dad was taking it especially hard, and that I should be the bigger person, and make peace before this turns into something permanent. She said, "Life is short, Lisa. You don't want to look back and regret cutting your family out of your life." And that was it. That's what it always came down to, me forgiving them so they didn't have to feel uncomfortable. They weren't calling because they cared about my son. They were calling because they missed the support. The image. The convenience of me being the one who always held everything together, even when they didn't deserve it. I showed my husband the email. He didn't say much at first. Just read it quietly. Then he got up, walked upstairs and came back down an hour later with a thick folder and a serious expression. He handed it to me. Inside were copies of every payment we'd made toward my brother's mortgage. Every bank transfer. Every Venmo receipt. Every loan we'd never called a loan. 2 years of transactions, carefully documented, organized by month. I didn't realize how much it really was until I saw it all together. Over $41,000. My hands were shaking. I think it finally hit me how far I'd gone trying to hold the family together while they laughed at my kid, mocked his trauma and called me the problem. My husband looked me in the eye and said, "We're done. If they try anything else we go legal. And I won't wait this time." I believed him. The next morning my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was flat, cold. He said they were ready to move past everything, if we were. Said they'd talked it over, and it was time to stop the drama. Said word for word, "We're still your family, Lisa. Don't let one bad moment erase a lifetime." I played it for my husband. He shook his head, took my phone and typed out a message to my brother. Not angry. Not emotional. Just final. "This is over. Do not contact Lisa again. Do not contact our son. Do not show up here. If you do, you'll hear from a lawyer, not us." Then he blocked his number on both of our phones. But he wasn't done. He called our lawyer and had everything notarized, not to sue them, but so that we could prove exactly how much we'd paid if they ever tried to spin this around. If they ever tried to say we were being unreasonable or if they tried to guilt trip us again. For the first time I felt like we were standing on solid ground. Later that night while our son was asleep I stood in the hallway and looked at him for a long time. He was curled up in bed with his stuffed tiger, breathing slow and even. He'd had a good day. Looked more mild. His stutter was still there but he didn't seem afraid of it anymore. That was all I needed to see. My husband came up behind me and said, "They don't get to touch this. Not ever again." And I knew we'd made the right choice. For the first time in years our house felt like ours. The silence finally felt like peace. The hardest part wasn't cutting them off. It was realizing how easy they made it. After everything, the dinner, the mocking, the messages, the doorsteps, the guilt, not one of them followed up to ask how our son was doing. Not one of them reached out just to say, "Is he okay?" Not even once. It was all about payments, power, pride. After we sent that final message and blocked them, it got quiet. But this time it wasn't a silence filled with tension. It was clean. My husband called it space to breathe, and I felt it too. The kind of quiet that lets you think clearly without constantly bracing for another guilt trip or emotional twist. We started focusing on our son. Really focusing. We took him to speech therapy 3 times a week, found this incredible therapist who didn't treat him like a case, but like a person. She told us early on, "He's not broken. He's reacting." That stuck with me. He wasn't broken. He was scared. And why wouldn't he be? He nearly got hit by a car 10 feet from his front door, then had to watch his own family laugh in his face when he tried to talk. But we had time now. No more drama to manage. No more money being funneled into someone else's life while ours stood still. We started doing simple things. Weekend walks. Pancakes on Sunday. We turned our guest room into a playroom. Bought a second-hand telescope. Took him to a science center. Anything that made him feel normal again. Anything that gave him space to be a kid. And then one morning out of nowhere he came into our room while we were still half asleep, sat on the bed and said, not perfectly but clearly, "Can we go to Disneyland?" We both froze. Then we looked at each other. And then we got up and booked the trip. We went the next weekend. Packed light, kept it simple. He rode the carousel 3 times, held on to my husband like his life depended on it during Pirates of the Caribbean, and tried every kind of ice cream they had. He still stuttered, but he didn't seem afraid of trying anymore. Every sentence was a win. On the flight home my husband squeezed my hand and said, "This is the only family we need." I didn't answer right away. I was staring out the window thinking about that dinner. The way they all sat there while my son was humiliated. The way no one stood up for him. Not even my own mother. Not even my father. And I realized something. Blood isn't family. Family doesn't ask for silence when your child is hurting. Family doesn't laugh when you're protecting your kid. And family doesn't act like love is conditional on how convenient you are to them. We haven't heard from them since. I still get that tight feeling sometimes when the holidays creep up or I see something that reminds me of the way things used to be. But it fades faster now. I don't miss them. I miss what I thought they were. Now I know better. Now I protect this family. The one that shows up, that listens, that chooses kindness without being asked. My son's still working through it. Some days are harder than others. But he laughs more now. Talks more. And he's not afraid to speak even when the words come out slow. I finally found my voice too. The first update. 2 weeks passed. Disneyland already felt like a dream. Our son had started calling it the happiest place in the world, in his halting, sweet way. He was still stuttering, but there was a confidence behind it now. He spoke more, sang under his breath, asked questions. There was joy again. We were finally healing. And then it happened. It was a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready to take our son to therapy when I saw an envelope sticking out of the mailbox. No postage. Just our last name written in blocky, uneven letters. No return address. No stamps. Someone had put it there by hand. I already knew. I opened it right there by the curb. 4 pages. All typed. No signature, no name. But I knew who it was from before I finished the second sentence. It was my brother. The letter wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was manipulative. He said he'd reflected, and was sorry I felt hurt, but he stood by his daughter. Said kids make mistakes, and it was my job as a mother to help my son toughen up, instead of making him more fragile. He said I'd cut them off without a warning, and left them in a very real financial crisis, and then, the part that made my stomach turn, he said he had proof of the payments and would be seeking legal advice if we didn't resolve things. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning, dressed up in fake concern and family language. A last-ditch effort to shake us up. I showed the letter to my husband that night. He didn't even read the whole thing. He scanned the first page, then calmly walked into the home office, opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the binder we'd created. He said, he thinks he's the only one with records. We made 3 copies of the binder. Sent one to our lawyer. One to a document storage service. Kept the original. And then, for the first time, we went on the offensive. Our lawyer drafted a cease and desist. It was firm, clear, and backed with everything. Dates. Amounts. Our correspondence. All of it. The message was simple. This ends here or it goes to court. If they harassed us again, we'd file a formal complaint for financial manipulation and harassment. If they contacted our son in any way, we'd pursue full legal protection. We had it delivered by courier. Signed receipt. 2 days later we got a response. Not from my brother, not from my parents. From their lawyer. A short, robotic letter saying they acknowledged the request and would refrain from any further communication. No apology. No humanity. Just the end. And that was it. It's been quiet since. No letters. No calls. No knocks at the door. Our son just had a full 2 weeks without a single regression. His therapist said she's amazed. Not just by the speech, by the spark in him. He's joking now. Teasing us. He even stood up in front of his class last week to talk about dinosaurs. It took him a full minute to get through the first sentence, but he did it. I stood outside his classroom after and cried in the car. That night we celebrated. Nothing big. Just pizza and music and a movie on the couch. But it felt like something big. Felt like everything we'd fought for, the boundaries, the silence, the protection, was finally blooming into something worth having. I still think about what they did. About what they said. About how easy it was for them to turn their backs on us the second we stopped paying for their comfort. But that chapter is closed. We're not looking back. We built our family from the inside out. Not from blood, not from guilt, not from tradition. From love. From actual love. And they don't get to touch it ever again.